Now let us talk about how do we develop rubrics. First, we need to identify the performance or process or activities to be assessed. How do we do that? You may refer to the assignments given to the students. Identify what are the activities that you require the students to do, and then simulate what are the learning process that students will have gone through in order to complete the assignment. And then ask yourself, what are the focus of the assessment? What would you like to achieve through the assignment? What are the outcomes that you intend to have after student completing the assignment? From there, you have an idea what are the criteria that you need to assess. You also want to ask yourself, what are the expectations from the students? What should the students do in order to fully meet your expectations? This will give you an idea in terms of the performance that you want the students to achieve. The second step, it will be determine the dimensions that needs to be displayed in students' words in order to demonstrate proficiency performance. Having the big directions of the assignments established, you will need to determine the criteria that best represent the words of good quality. Identify them as the list of the criteria that you would like the students to achieve. Next, you need to decide the scoring levels. How many levels are there? Normally, we will recommend that the lowest scoring level should be 0. Then you can have 4 or 5 levels in total. Of course, you can have more levels. The more level it is, the more refined the score that you may use to differentiate the performance of the students. Only the problem later, it will be how do you explicitly identify the performance criteria when you have so many levels. Personally, I will go for 0 to 4, which I find it is already quite challenging to construct the descriptions differentiating different levels. Some prefer go to 0 to 3 with a rationale that they would like to prevent the mid-level as the reference. When you have only 4 levels, there is no 50-50. It is either fail or pass. And if you have 5 levels here, psychologically, we will always benchmark our requirement with 2, which is at the middle levels. This will have to base on the preferences of the assessor, which I find myself okay with 0 to 4, and therefore I will construct the rubrics based on this. Ultimately, this leads to 2 dimensions here. There are a series of criteria and there are a series of different quality levels. Next, we will need to develop the specific standard performance level for each scoring levels. This is when we start developing the performance criteria. While constructing these performance criteria, you need to bear in mind that the description should be clear enough to differentiate between different scoring levels, and there is a consistency in terms of the considerations, and you will see the progressions in terms of the quality improve from the lower level to the upper levels. Now let us demonstrate how do you develop the rubrics at different levels. For the sake of understanding, we will go for the most simplest form of the rubrics. For example, 3 score levels. 3 score levels means that it will be poor, moderate, and good. Now how do you develop that? Normally, we will first start with the highest level. Define the performance of the highest level, which in your perceptions, what constitutes the excellent performance of the students. Once you have established the top level, normally we will construct the lowest level. Then you will have to describe the characteristics that is considered unacceptable. Once you have done the lowest level, then you can work out the intermediate. The intermediate level, it will be somewhere in between the top level and the lowest level. It should be better than the lowest level, but not as excellent as the top level. And this middle level here should be able to contrast between the criteria of the top level and the criteria of the lowest level. There are some ways that you can deal with. One of the ways is to deal with certain descriptive terms such as excellent, good, and need work. By looking at the terminology, we know that this one, it will be the highest, this one is acceptable, and this one is the lowest. Another example, you can use the word rarely, generally, always. They are representing different degrees of a situation. Always means nearly all the time. Generally means a majority of time. Rarely means a minority of time. Or you may use this term here: beginning, developing, accomplishing, exemplary. This also represents different stages or levels of the performance. Depending the numbers of the scoring levels, if you have 4, that means you need 4 terms to differentiate them. If you have 3, then you will need 3. If you have 5, then you will need to construct a series of terms of at least 5 levels. This is one way to differentiate the scoring levels. Nevertheless, there is still some limitations. If your performance criteria solely rely on this, you may have difficulty to ensure a good consistency and reliability in terms of the assessment when come to different assessors. The reason being here is this terminology here are comparative, which is relative to the others. There is no clear-cut definitions between the differences between excellent and good. For example, what constitutes the excellent? 90% and above or 80% and above. Different assessors may interpret the term differently. That means there is still certain levels of subjectivities. Normally, when we construct the rubrics here, in order to reduce the degree of subjectivities, we will construct the descriptions in more than one components. Some part of them can be using these comparative terminologies. And if possible, you will need to incorporate certain things with really clear-cut definitions, such as you are able to differentiate a leader and a strong member. In a group, it is easy for us to identify who are the leaders and who are the core members. Same goes to satisfactory member and core member. If you have this kind of element here, it is always good for your rubrics. At least for the respective component, the criteria are explicit. You may also go one step further by converting those into something which is measurable. For example, design value, assumptions, and considerations are given without proper justifications. Calculations are demonstrated but partially incorrect, in the bracket less than 30%. This is an estimated value here. Now, in order to score the level 2 here, the students cannot have error more than 30%. As compared to the other one, calculations are demonstrated, but results are largely questionable. In terms of the descriptions, there are differences. Just in case that different assessors have different definitions in terms of largely and partially. You may also indicate the degree in the mode of quantifiable manner. Now, the definitions of largely is by more than 30%. Let us try another example. Some contradictions and/or redundancy are observed. In order to elaborate this sum here, it is stated that not more than 30%. As compared to the other one, many contradictions and redundancy are observed. Bracket, more than 30%. Now we know that this many here is referring to more than 30%. Another example, understandable terminologies and grammatically correct, 50 to 70% of time. And then when come to another level, appropriate terminology and grammatically correct most of the time. The definition, it would be 70% to 90% of time. And then appropriate terminology and grammatically correct all of the time. By definitions, 90% of the time. When you provide some measurable definitions in terms of different scoring levels, this provides a good guide to the assessor while rating the performance of the students. This will make the rubrics to be more reliable and consistent.